Just bought this Magello Fusion 18 watercolor palette. It's made from plastic. It's got 18 trays inside, and the one thing that you run into when you buy a new watercolor palette is the paint beads up on it. Let me show you what I mean by that. You see how that black paint just beads up? It's hard to judge the color when that happens. A lot of people will tell you to use toothpaste or baking soda or to take a scrubby to it. There's even wet and dry sandpaper that you can use to make the surface rougher, but it might make it harder to clean and the colors might stain the palette more. So the solution that I use is just to use the palette. Here's my John Pike palette. This is ultramarine blue. And notice how the color doesn't beat up on it. It's much easier to judge how light that is when it doesn't turn into a bunch of small little beads of color. This is actually the tin that my core watercolors came in. You can tell it's well used. I mixed a lot of colors on here, and here's the side that I normally mix on, and it's pretty smooth. You don't see any beading on here, so it's just a matter of breaking it in. I wouldn't recommend scuffing up your palette that you just bought just to make it flow a little better. This is a brand new palette, and I'm going to try the toothpaste on the right side of it. And I'll just rub it right into it. I've already done it once to this palette, and it didn't really seem to do much to it. It's nice and minty. To add a little bit more, I think the idea is that toothpaste is slightly abrasive, but not enough that it's going to scratch it. Some toothpaste has baking soda in it. All right, that's probably enough. I'm going to rinse it under the sink just so I get rid of it real quick. Now let's see if this still beads up. Yep. So toothpaste really didn't do anything for me. I don't know if it's the brand that I'm using or if toothpaste just really doesn't work that well for fixing this problem. But I mean, you can see it's beating up quite aggressively. Another solution was baking soda. So here's some regular household baking soda, and I'll just sprinkle some in there. Spritz it with some water to make a paste. And I'll just scrub away. I think this is a little bit more abrasive than toothpaste, but it's not really abrasive enough to scratch it. In fact, if your palette is really stained, you could probably use this to remove some of those colors. I know phthalo blue and magenta, those are staining colors, and they'll sometimes leave a little bit of color behind even after you clean it. Just keep scrubbing. So this is the second time I did baking soda, and I did toothpaste on here twice. All right, I'll rinse this off and see what happens. So you can see this side beads up a little bit less. It's still a problem though. But I mean, cleaning it 4 times, twice with baking soda and twice with toothpaste, it's not such a great result for all that work. I say just use the palette. I have some wet and dry sandpaper. This is 600 grit. It's mostly used for polishing, not so much for removing material, so it shouldn't scratch too much. I'm going to try it out on the back of an old watercolor palette that I destroyed with acrylics. And that's something, if you're going to use sandpaper to rough up your watercolor palette, test it out on the back first. That way, if it's too aggressive and you put some scratches in there, at least it won't be on your mixing areas. So before I even begin, I'll just show that it beads up on here. I mean, that's the same as the other palette. Even though it's old, the back has never been broken in. You can use it wet to keep the dust down. So I'm just going to give it a light sanding. I'll test it out to see if it helped with the beading. It's a little bit better, but it's not like a broken in palette. Maybe I could sand it some more. That was a much heavier sanding, so maybe that will help. That's a little better. Yep. Now the question is, will this leave scratch marks? I think this sandpaper is so fine that it wouldn't. I'll clean it off. Looks pretty good. Make sure You test it out on the back of your palette, and as you can see, this is 600 grit, which is really fine. I mean, I could try a rougher sandpaper. This is 150 grit, and it has a different color. It doesn't say wet and dry, but I'm going to use it that way. This is definitely more coarse, I can hear it. That's more aggressive, I can see more powder on here. I can feel it. Would not use 150 grit. Well, let's see if it repels the water or not. Yeah, it still does. It's strange. Oh, that's that is not good. That is way too coarse. I mean, that's definitely harder to clean. Not only did that not help with the beading situation, it's now much harder to clean. I mean, I should get rid of the beading though, I would think. Yeah, that's a disaster. Do not use coarse grit sandpaper. It didn't fix the problem, and it's also now harder to clean, and I'm seeing swirl marks in there. I don't know if you can see that. Another recommendation is to use a kitchen scrubby. I cut this one down. You can see one side is a dark blue, and it's got that coarse scrubbing material on there for cleaning your pots and pans. The other side is a regular sponge. So I'm going to try it on here. I mean, maybe I'll remove some of this acrylic paint on here while I'm at it, but let's see if it works to stop the water from beading up. Maybe I'll add some water to it. Another thing about these kitchen scrubbies is some of them are more aggressive than others, so I kind of hesitate in recommending this, because if this works for me, and then you go out and buy one of those ones that are like yellow with the green material on there, I think they might be a little bit more aggressive. You might get scratches, so definitely test it out before you try it out on the good side of your palette. It seemed to help a little bit. It's pulling back, but it's not beating up as bad as it was before. Maybe if I scrub it some more, it'll help. Now this is the second test for the scrubby. It still kind of beads up a little. I mean, that's a slight improvement. This is starting to bead up too. So none of these really solve the problem. I think that the best thing to do is just use the palette. Out of all of these, the worst was the coarse sandpaper. I think maybe the fine sandpaper helped a little bit, but you can see it's still pulling back. It's not like a broken in watercolor palette. The scrubby is a little bit better, but it's not perfect either. So none of these are really a good solution. So out of every option, I would say just use your watercolor palette. I think it helps to let the paint dry on there and then wash it off. But just using it should break it in to where it doesn't bead up anymore. Hope you like this video. Please subscribe and check out some of my playlists. Thanks for watching.